The moment Meghan Markle first glimpsed what had been unleashed onto the world, she froze. Her heart raced, palms clammy, and a sharp, hollow feeling gripped her stomach. She had always been cautious, aware of the spotlight that came with marrying into the royal family. But nothing could have prepared her for this. What she saw was deeply personal, shocking, and humiliating in ways that words could barely capture. Private moments she had assumed were forever hidden had been exposed, shared, whispered about, and, worst of all, leaked. And at the center of this storm was someone she never thought would betray her trust, Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Can you imagine the shock of realizing that someone so close, someone who had herself navigated the treacherous waters of public scrutiny, was now revealing secrets that could shake the very foundation of your life? The yacht days, the serene, sun-soaked images of luxury and secrecy, were no longer just memories. They had transformed into evidence, and the world was watching. It all started with a quiet invitation. Meghan had been told about a private gathering, a retreat away from prying eyes, where royalty could let their guards down. The yacht was majestic, a floating palace slicing through the azure waters, its polished teak decks gleaming under the summer sun. The air was heavy with salt and anticipation, carrying whispers of laughter and clandestine conversations that no one outside these walls were supposed to hear. In her mind, Meghan imagined this as a rare chance to bond, to experience moments of laughter and camaraderie, away from the cameras and the incessant commentary. Little did she know, it would become the backdrop for a scandal she couldn't escape. From the very first moment, the yacht carried an air of tension masked by polite smiles and clinking glasses. It was the kind of tension that hints at secrets, the kind that keeps a person awake at night, wondering who is truly trustworthy and who is silently calculating every move. Meghan, ever perceptive, sensed the subtle shifts in energy. There were glances exchanged, half-smiles that carried too much meaning, and conversations abruptly ended the moment she approached. Every instinct she had screamed that something was off. But the full gravity of the situation didn't reveal itself until weeks later, when Sarah Ferguson, a woman who had herself endured the sting of public exposure, began to speak in ways no one expected. The Duchess's revelations began quietly. First, they were whispers to the press, vague comments on magazine pages, hints that something had happened on a certain yacht. Then came the interviews, the casual remarks dropped during high-profile appearances, each word meticulously designed to lure curiosity and outrage. The story was spreading like wildfire, and Meghan felt the walls closing in. She had faced criticism before, endured relentless headlines and opinion columns dissecting her every move, but this felt different. This wasn't about public perception anymore. It was deeply personal. It was about trust, betrayal, and a sudden, unyielding exposure of moments she believed belonged only to a privileged, hidden world. Imagine seeing your most private moments described in detail to the world, moments you had trusted to a select few. It was more than embarrassing. It was a violation, one that threatened not only her image but her sense of security and belonging. And the photos, they were the crown jewel of the scandal. Intimate, candid, moments of laughter, and perhaps indiscretion, snapped without consent, circulating now with an intensity that made every glance at her phone a potential heart attack. She wondered who had taken them, why, and, most importantly, how they could be stopped. The invasion of privacy was palpable. Every memory of those days on the yacht became tainted, transformed from cherished experiences into potential evidence for public consumption. But why does this matter now? Why, after all these years, would Sarah Ferguson choose to expose these moments? The timing was peculiar. Meghan's life had been a whirlwind of media scrutiny, philanthropic endeavors, and public appearances. Yet nothing prepared her, or the public, for this revelation. There were hints, fleeting mentions, and quiet rumors that some royal insiders had been aware of the events, yet nothing concrete had emerged until now. Ferguson's decision to speak publicly had set off a chain reaction, and the shockwaves were felt not only within Meghan's personal circle, but across the entire royal family. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying. What else might be exposed next? The introduction of the yacht and the private photos into public discourse opened a Pandora's box of speculation. The media frenzy was inevitable. Headlines screamed accusations, innuendo, and conjecture. Social media exploded, memes proliferated, and the public, ever eager for scandal, latched onto every tiny detail. Meghan found herself navigating a labyrinth of judgment and curiosity, forced to confront not only her own vulnerability, but also the harsh reality of life under constant scrutiny. She asked herself repeatedly, could anything she do stop the narrative from spiraling further out of control? Or was she doomed to relive these yacht days over and over, each memory a fresh wound inflicted by the public's unrelenting gaze? Even within the family, the ripple effects were unmistakable. Conversations that had once been private became fraught with tension. Every glance and word carried double meanings, every interaction a potential minefield. Meghan began to notice subtle shifts in dynamics. Some members offering sympathetic support, others maintaining a careful, unreadable neutrality. The yacht days were no longer just about summer escapes and private conversations. They were now a touchstone for trust and betrayal, a lens through which relationships would be examined, tested, and, in some cases, forever altered. And yet, amid the chaos and shock, there was a deeper, more personal conflict brewing within Meghan. The photos and revelations forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, loyalty, and the price of public life. Was the pursuit of transparency worth this magnitude of exposure? Could private moments ever truly remain private when one's life was a matter of public fascination? The answers were elusive, and the questions were relentless. Each day brought a new article, a new social media post, a new whisper, another reminder that the past had returned with a vengeance. And this time, there was no hiding. As the storm continued to build, Meghan realized that she was at a crossroads. The yacht, once a symbol of leisure and connection, had become a focal point for scrutiny, gossip, and public judgment. Ferguson's revelations had unleashed forces beyond anyone's control, and the ripple effect was only beginning. Every friend, confidant, and associate she had once trusted could potentially be implicated, or worse, could betray her in ways she could never anticipate. And through it all, Meghan's mind raced with one relentless question. How far would the exposure go? How much of her private life would the world see before it was over? And most importantly, who would be next to speak? The intensity of the situation was compounded by Meghan's understanding of the stakes. This wasn't just about embarrassment or fleeting gossip. It was about reputation, legacy, and the fragile equilibrium of relationships within one of the most scrutinized families in the world. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, had the potential to be dissected, interpreted, and weaponized. And through it all, the image of the yacht, the intimate photos, and Sarah Ferguson's voice, calm, knowing, and precise, haunted her every thought. The world was now privy to secrets that she had never intended to reveal, and the consequences were impossible to predict. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever stepped onto a place so luxurious, so meticulously designed, that it almost felt unreal? A space that promised freedom but concealed secrets at every corner? That was the yacht. Imagine gleaming decks of polished teak stretching endlessly beneath the sun, the subtle scent of salt and sea mingling with expensive perfumes and the faint tang of champagne. Every detail had been curated to create the perfect illusion of leisure, of calm, of escape. And yet, beneath that sun-soaked facade, tension simmered like a storm waiting to break. Meghan had been told this would be a private retreat, a rare chance to unwind away from cameras, scrutiny, and the relentless gaze of the public. But as soon as she stepped aboard, subtle hints suggested this was anything but ordinary. The crew moved like shadows, efficient yet distant. Security was discreet, almost invisible, but Meghan could sense the watchful eyes lingering in hallways, over shoulders, behind closed doors. Something felt different. Something was off. And she couldn't shake the growing sense that this yacht, for all its beauty, was a stage set for a drama far beyond what she had imagined. From the very beginning, she noticed the glances, half-smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes, conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered the room. whispers that vanished like smoke whenever she approached. Was it paranoia, or had she stumbled into a carefully orchestrated scene? Meghan had always trusted her instincts, and they were screaming that there was more beneath the surface, more than just sun and laughter. Who was watching? Who was listening? And why did it feel as if the yacht itself had secrets it refused to share? The other key figures aboard the yacht added layers of complexity. Prince Andrew, whose name alone carried weight and controversy, exuded a presence that was both magnetic and unnerving. Meghan couldn't help but feel the duality of charm and something darker, something calculated behind his polite words. And then there was Sarah Ferguson, whose reputation for candor and scandal preceded her. Meghan had always respected Ferguson's ability to navigate the treacherous royal waters. But in this setting, Ferguson seemed like an enigma, friendly one moment, cryptic the next, and occasionally, just faintly intimidating. What was she plotting? What lines had she already crossed without Meghan even realizing? As the yacht sliced through the turquoise waters, laughter floated above the soft hum of engines and the occasional call of seabirds. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, but discreetly, almost teasingly, as if they were in on secrets no one else could see. Meghan tried to relax, tried to engage in polite conversation, yet every smile felt forced, every word weighed with an unspoken tension. Was this merely etiquette, or was something more sinister brewing behind the surface smiles and polished politeness? Meghan found herself exploring the yacht's decks, wandering past cabins adorned with luxury, and stepping into spaces that felt almost sacred in their privacy. She thought about the moments she had shared with close friends, the quiet laughter over champagne at midnight, and the fleeting sense of escape that made the yacht feel like a temporary sanctuary. But now, as she observed the interactions between Andrew and Ferguson and noticed subtle exchanges of knowing glances, the sense of sanctuary began to erode. What had been intimate and private was being carefully observed, catalogued, and, unbeknownst to her, would soon be weaponized. And then there were the photographs. At first, Meghan didn't know they existed. She didn't imagine that these moments, laughing on sunlit decks, casually interacting with Andrew and Ferguson, seemingly innocent snapshots of relaxation, could ever be a source of scandal. But as the days passed and subtle hints began circulating, she felt a creeping unease. Who had taken these photos? Why? And what was their endgame? There is something uniquely unsettling about realizing that the very moments you consider private, sacred even, could be preserved and exposed to the world without consent. The crew, though courteous, sometimes seemed to drift in ways that weren't entirely professional. Cameras mounted for routine surveillance, or opportunistic lenses capturing details that no one was meant to see. Meghan began to notice shadows flicker in hallways, the way certain staff lingered too long, the almost imperceptible shifts when certain conversations were held. Every instinct Meghan had told her to be cautious, to guard herself against potential betrayals. Yet, she tried to push these thoughts aside, telling herself that this was a royal gathering, a chance for networking, relaxation, and perhaps even forging alliances in the most unlikely of places. But deep down, she couldn't escape the sense that the yacht had become a trap disguised as paradise. Meghan tried to focus on the moments that were meant to be joyful. Evening cocktails, laughter under star-strewn skies, and quiet conversations that touched on everything from charitable work to subtle royal politics. She reminded herself that appearances mattered, that decorum was paramount, and that, in royal life, every smile and every gesture carried weight. Yet, the awareness that something more sinister was brewing never fully left her. Could she trust the people around her? Could she trust the very environment she was in? Or had the yacht itself become a stage for secrets waiting to explode? The tension reached its peak during a seemingly innocuous afternoon gathering on the sun deck. Glasses of champagne caught the sunlight, and Meghan observed the interplay of social maneuvering. Ferguson, in her signature poise, engaged Andrew in a conversation that seemed light-hearted on the surface but carried undertones that Meghan couldn't quite place. There was a sharpness in Ferguson's tone at moments, a subtle dominance that hinted at knowledge beyond the casual observer's understanding. Meghan tried to focus on the waves, the rhythm of the ocean, attempting to ground herself in the tangible, the here and now. But the undercurrents, both literal and metaphorical, were impossible to ignore. Every smile, every casual remark, felt loaded with meaning she couldn't yet decipher. And then it happened. A photograph, taken at the precise moment Meghan laughed at an innocent joke, would later be the one that everyone's eyes would gravitate toward. At the time, she had no idea. She didn't know that this image, and others like it, had been quietly captured, catalogued, and stored. The weight of these moments was invisible then, yet it would soon become the fulcrum for a scandal so potent that it threatened to overshadow everything else in her life. The yacht, for all its beauty and tranquility, had become a silent witness, recording secrets that would eventually explode into the public sphere. It was here, amid laughter and the glint of sunlight on the water, that Meghan first sensed the invisible forces at play. Subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in energy, fleeting glances, and the quiet presence of Ferguson in particular hinted that something monumental was simmering just beneath the surface. Meghan tried to push the thoughts aside, telling herself this was a royal social event, that shadows and whispers existed everywhere, and that paranoia could easily cloud judgment. But her instincts, honed by years of navigating public life, screamed that the yacht was not merely a vessel for leisure. It was the stage for a story that was about to unfold, one that would ensnare her in ways she could never have anticipated. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light across the deck, Meghan realized something chilling. The moments she had considered private, the laughter, the casual interactions, the fleeting gestures, all had been observed. Every detail recorded, and someone, somewhere, was now poised to reveal them to the world. A sense of dread settled over her. What secrets were about to be unleashed? Who would control the narrative? And what would it mean for her life, her reputation, and her very sense of self? Meghan's thoughts raced. Could she stop it? Could she even prepare for the storm that was about to hit? The yacht, once a symbol of escape, had become a harbinger of exposure. And as the evening wore on, one truth became unavoidable. Nothing would ever be the same again. Every glance, every whispered word, every photograph would be scrutinized. And the world, hungry for scandal, eager for gossip, was waiting to devour it all. But little did Meghan know, the revelation wasn't just coming from the press. It was coming from someone who had been there all along, someone she trusted, someone who understood both the glamour and the dangers of royal life. And the moment Sarah Ferguson decided to speak would ignite a firestorm no one could contain. The yacht, serene on the surface, was now a crucible of secrets, a floating stage where trust would be tested, alliances questioned, and reputations shattered. Meghan had no idea that in just days, her private moments aboard this luxurious vessel would be exposed to millions, leaving her stunned, vulnerable, and scrambling to reclaim a life that seemed to be slipping through her fingers. And as the first hints of those revelations reached her, one thought burned in her mind. What happens when the people you trust the most are the ones willing to betray you in ways you never imagined? What would you do if someone you trusted, someone you thought understood the fragile balance of royal life, decided to turn your secrets into headlines? That's the question Meghan Markle was forced to confront when Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, stepped into the spotlight with words that no one expected and nobody was prepared for. The tension began subtly. First came the quiet hints, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Meghan noticed the headlines, small, almost casual, in tabloids and online publications, but at the time, she dismissed them. Ferguson's comments seemed like playful anecdotes, stories told to highlight her own escapades, her experiences navigating palace life. But then the whispers became sharper, the anecdotes more pointed, and the casual hints edged dangerously close to personal revelations about Meghan herself. Imagine the moment you realize that someone is speaking about you in a way that feels like betrayal, but is cloaked under the guise of humor, candor, or royal storytelling. Ferguson's reputation as a truth-teller had always been a double-edged sword. The public admired her for her openness, for sharing her side of palace life with wit and charisma. But this same openness now became a weapon pointed directly at Meghan. Suddenly, stories about yacht days and private moments were emerging, framed not as gossip, but as confessions from someone who had lived it. Sarah Ferguson had always been skilled at reading the room, at understanding timing, tone, and audience. She knew precisely when to release information how much to reveal, and which details would captivate the public. Meghan, on the other hand, was being blindsided by the meticulous orchestration of every word, every interview, every public remark Ferguson made. The Duchess's revelations were deliberate, strategic, and shocking in their clarity. The first major public revelation hit like a tidal wave. In an interview conducted on a sunny afternoon in London, Ferguson mentioned the yacht, briefly, almost casually, as if mentioning the weather. "It was a beautiful day," she said, a slight smirk on her face. "And the company was interesting." The world immediately seized upon those words. Was Ferguson speaking about Andrew? About Meghan? The ambiguity alone sent speculation spiraling across social media, news outlets, and royal fan forums. Every detail, every pause, every chuckle was dissected for meaning. Meghan's reaction was immediate. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the creeping heat of panic that had accompanied her in other public scandals. But this was different. This time, it wasn't just gossip. It was someone she had considered a confidant, someone who understood the stakes, revealing details that felt deeply personal. Ferguson's ability to blend humor, charm, and precision meant that each revelation landed like a scalpel, cutting deep, leaving permanent impressions, and igniting curiosity and outrage in equal measure. The Duchess did not stop there. Over the following weeks, she made appearances on various talk shows, offering what seemed like light-hearted anecdotes about life in the royal circle. But hidden within these anecdotes were layers of information that cast Meghan's private yacht days in an entirely new light. Ferguson spoke of moments that had been casual, playful, and intimate, but now, framed in the public eye, they were provocative and scandalous. Meghan felt trapped between disbelief and dread. How could ordinary moments be weaponized so effectively? How could one person hold so much power over her narrative? Consider the power of a photograph paired with Ferguson's commentary. A picture of Meghan laughing on the yacht, framed by sunlight and the pristine blue of the ocean, was suddenly described with an undertone that suggested secrets and hidden knowledge. The effect was instantaneous. Headlines exploded with speculation. Yacht days exposed. Meghan's private moments leaked. Ferguson reveals secrets royal family didn't want you to see. Each story seemed to escalate in drama, further amplifying Meghan's sense of helplessness. Meghan questioned herself constantly. Had she underestimated Ferguson's intentions? Had she misread the subtle cues that indicated Ferguson might reveal sensitive information? And most importantly, what did this mean for her relationships within the royal family? Trust, Meghan realized, was a fragile commodity. Once broken, it could not be easily restored. And Ferguson's revelations threatened not only Meghan's privacy, but also the delicate balance of alliances, loyalties, and influence within the palace. The psychological toll was enormous. Meghan was forced to relive moments she had thought long buried, moments that should have remained private. Every laugh, every gesture, every interaction with Andrew or other figures on the yacht was now subject to public scrutiny, reframed under Ferguson's lens of truth-telling. Meghan felt the weight of exposure pressing down on her, her sense of security shattered, her confidence in the people around her shaken. But why did Ferguson choose this moment? Timing, Meghan realized, was everything. Sarah Ferguson had waited, observed, and understood the right moment to speak. Perhaps it was calculated to maximize impact, coinciding with events that heightened public interest, media attention, and, perhaps, even internal royal tension. Or maybe it was simpler. Ferguson, who had endured her own fair share of scandal, had a sense of poetic justice. Whatever the reasoning, the result was the same. Meghan was blindsided, shocked, and left scrambling to control the narrative that was now rapidly escaping her. The Duchess's revelations were not limited to mere anecdotes. Ferguson hinted at personal dynamics, private conversations, and subtle interactions that painted Meghan's yacht days in an ambiguous but scandalous light. Viewers were left to interpret meaning, and the ambiguity fueled imagination and speculation. It was a masterclass in creating intrigue, one moment playful, the next explosive, always keeping Meghan off balance. And then came the most damning element: Ferguson's direct references to photographs. "I saw the images," Ferguson said in one interview, voice measured, eyes glinting with a mixture of humor and knowingness. Moments that were meant to be private, captured for eternity. The comment was subtle but potent. The public knew, instantly, that there were photographs, images that had not been meant to see the light of day. And as these statements circulated, Meghan's stomach sank. She realized that the privacy she had once taken for granted had evaporated entirely. The stakes were no longer just personal embarrassment, they were structural. These revelations threatened to destabilize carefully maintained reputations, influence public opinion, and, perhaps most alarmingly, impact relationships within the royal family. Meghan could feel the shift in energy around her. Conversations became tense, glances sharper, and she began to notice the subtle ways in which individuals repositioned themselves in response to Ferguson's disclosures. Trust was fraying at the edges. Alliances were being tested. And Meghan, for all her composure, felt like a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't fully understand. Every move Meghan made was now shadowed by Ferguson's words. The Duchess's revelations had cast a long, inescapable shadow over the yacht days. Meghan found herself questioning every interaction, wondering which moments had been observed, photographed, or noted for later public consumption. Who else had known? Who else had watched? The uncertainty gnawed at her, producing anxiety that was almost impossible to escape. Yet, amidst the panic and disbelief, Meghan tried to hold on to one thing: control. She thought about strategies, potential responses, and ways to reclaim the narrative. But Ferguson's moves had already set the course. Public curiosity, fueled by strategic revelations and tantalizing hints, had ignited a frenzy that no single statement or action could easily contain. Meghan realized the situation was no longer just about defending herself. It was about navigating a minefield carefully set by someone with impeccable timing, influence, and understanding of the palace's vulnerabilities. Ferguson's disclosures weren't simply accidental. They were deliberate, calibrated, and devastatingly effective. Meghan, who had once assumed she could manage exposure and control narrative, discovered that there were forces she could not anticipate. The yacht days, once a memory of leisure and camaraderie, had become a public spectacle, reframed by Ferguson's commentary and the strategic release of information. Every smile, every casual conversation, every glance exchanged aboard that floating palace was now dissected, analyzed, and speculated upon by millions around the world. And as Meghan absorbed the magnitude of Ferguson's actions, one chilling realization hit. This was only the beginning. If Ferguson had the courage or audacity to reveal these details, what else might come to light? And more importantly, what impact would these revelations have on Meghan's life, her reputation, and the fragile networks of trust that defined her position within the royal sphere? The stakes had shifted entirely. Ferguson's explosive revelations had set in motion a chain of events that Meghan could neither predict nor prevent. The yacht, once a symbol of escape, had become a crucible of exposure, and Meghan, caught in the crossfire, was left to navigate the fallout of someone else's narrative. And just as Meghan thought she could begin to process the shock, a new layer of reality hit. Ferguson hinted, not with direct accusation, but with a knowing glance and carefully chosen words, that there were photographs, intimate and unguarded, that would soon find their way into public discourse. The words barely needed saying. The implication alone was enough. And Meghan, standing at the precipice of disbelief and dread, understood that her private life was about to be laid bare in ways she had never imagined. What would Meghan do when the images themselves surfaced? Could she survive the scrutiny, the judgment, the whispers, and the relentless media storm? And more importantly, what secrets might Ferguson reveal next? Secrets that could shake not just Meghan's life, but the entire royal family? The storm was only beginning. Have you ever experienced the sickening feeling of realizing that something you thought was private has been exposed? That what you held close, what you considered yours and yours alone, is suddenly out there for everyone to see. For Meghan Markle, that moment arrived in the most devastating way imaginable: the leaked photos. It started quietly. Whispers, fleeting comments from aides, journalists dropping hints, and the occasional cryptic headline that seemed innocuous at first. Mystery yacht moments revealed. Private royal interactions spark intrigue. At first, Meghan tried to dismiss them. She told herself it was exaggeration, rumor, a misinterpretation. But then came confirmation. The images existed. They were real, and they were about to become public. Imagine the sensation, a photograph taken in what you assumed was the safety of privacy. A candid moment of laughter, a glance exchanged, the subtle gestures of someone completely unaware of the camera capturing every nuance. Now imagine seeing that image surface online, the way it seemed to stare at you, frozen in time, waiting for the world to judge, speculate, and dissect. Meghan's stomach dropped. Her hands shook. Her mind raced with questions. Who had taken the photos? How had they gotten out? And why? The images themselves were deceptively ordinary. At first glance, they appeared almost innocuous. Meghan laughing on the sun deck, the sunlight glinting off her hair. A casual conversation with Prince Andrew, their expressions caught in an unguarded moment. Ferguson nearby, the ever-observant smile tugging at her lips. Yet beneath the surface, these photographs carried layers of implication. Taken out of context, each frame could be interpreted in countless ways. And that was exactly the danger. The first leak to the media caused an immediate frenzy. Headlines screamed allegations and innuendo, turning what had been simple, personal memories into potential scandal. Meghan Markle's yacht days exposed, intimate moments with Prince Andrew revealed. Ferguson confirms royal secrets. The world, ever hungry for intrigue, seized on every detail. The images spread like wildfire across social media platforms, shared, reshared, debated, and mocked. Meghan watched as her life, her privacy, and her most personal moments became fodder for global consumption. The betrayal cut deepest because of who was involved. Sarah Ferguson had known of the photographs for weeks, possibly longer, and had made deliberate choices about how and when to reveal them. Her public comments, initially framed as casual anecdotes, now carried the weight of someone with insider knowledge, someone who understood the consequences of every word. Meghan's mind spun with disbelief. How could a woman who had faced her own public humiliations show so little mercy? But it wasn't just Ferguson's involvement that unnerved Meghan. There was the question of Prince Andrew's role. His presence in the photos added layers of complexity and potential scandal. The images, innocuous at first glance, hinted at private familiarity, interactions that the public could twist into insinuation. Meghan's anxiety skyrocketed as she imagined the narratives the media would construct, the rumors that would take hold, and the whispers that would follow her for months, perhaps years. She began to recall the yacht days with a new lens. Every laugh, every glance, every casual touch suddenly seemed loaded with significance she hadn't intended. The reality of exposure transformed memory into anxiety, joy into fear. It was as though the yacht itself had become a trap, a beautiful, sunlit cage holding secrets that no longer belonged solely to her. The images, though still private at first, had become evidence of a life under constant scrutiny. Then came the first official leaks. A tabloid posted a low-resolution photo of Meghan on the deck, a seemingly innocent moment framed with sensationalist text suggesting intrigue and impropriety. Social media erupted. Thousands of comments speculated, debated, and dissected every detail. Meghan felt her privacy dissolve with every click, every share, every mention. What had been fleeting and personal moments were now dissected for public entertainment. Every thought, every intention, every context she had once trusted was being erased by assumption and conjecture. Her initial response was disbelief, followed by anger. How had this happened? Who had betrayed her trust? The yacht, once a symbol of escape, had become a stage. And every person aboard, Ferguson, Andrew, even the seemingly unobtrusive crew, now seemed complicit, whether by action or omission. Meghan struggled to understand the chain of events that had led to this breach. Had Ferguson been planning this all along? Or was it opportunistic, seizing the right moment to dominate headlines and public attention? The emotional toll was immense. Every interaction Meghan had had with Prince Andrew, every joke, every casual touch, every conversation she assumed private, now existed in a public vacuum where meaning was fluid and potentially damaging. The world would interpret these images with the curiosity of strangers, the bias of gossip, and the relentless hunger for scandal. Meghan realized that the yacht days, which had seemed idyllic at the time, were now forever altered in her memory. They were tainted by exposure, a private paradise transformed into a public spectacle. Even attempts to control the narrative were met with frustration. Legal teams scrambled, palace aides whispered strategies, and public relations experts drafted carefully worded statements. But the images were already out there. The damage, whether reputational, emotional, or relational, had begun. Meghan's mind raced. How could she protect herself? How could she reclaim any semblance of privacy when the evidence of her life's most personal moments was circulating globally? And yet, amid the panic and chaos, Meghan noticed subtle patterns in the leaks. Certain images emerged first, others later, almost as if someone was orchestrating the release for maximum impact. It wasn't random. Someone had strategy, timing, and influence. The realization hit like a blow. This was deliberate, calculated, and designed to destabilize. The yacht had not only witnessed private moments, it had captured them in a way that could be exploited. The psychological strain became almost unbearable. Meghan replayed moments in her head, dissecting gestures, analyzing conversations, and imagining how they might be misinterpreted. Every photograph was a puzzle piece, each with its potential for misrepresentation. Who else knew? Were there more images waiting to be released? And what else had Ferguson shared behind closed doors that Meghan didn't even know? The public's reaction intensified the pressure. Commentators debated the implications, fans speculated wildly, and critics questioned her motives, demeanor, and associations. Every story, every article, every tweet felt like a personal assault, amplifying the sense of violation. Meghan's daily life became a gauntlet, each moment shadowed by the leaked images, each glance at her phone a potential shock. As Meghan struggled to process the impact, one horrifying realization struck her. This was far from over. The first wave of images had hit, but there were whispers of more. Additional photographs, potentially even more compromising, could emerge at any time. And Ferguson, with her history of strategic revelations, remained a wild card. Meghan's sense of control, of privacy, of security had been shattered, replaced by a pervasive sense of vulnerability. And just when she thought she might find a moment of peace, the implications extended beyond the media. Within the royal family, discussions and tension had already begun. Questions of loyalty, discretion, and responsibility hovered over every conversation. Meghan had always understood the scrutiny of public life, but this breach was personal, intimate, and far-reaching. The images had become a catalyst, a trigger for judgment, speculation, and potential rupture in relationships she had once believed were secure. The yacht, serene and gleaming under the summer sun, had become an indelible symbol of exposure, a reminder that privacy is fragile and trust can be weaponized. Meghan knew that every choice she made from this point forward would be scrutinized through the lens of these photographs. And yet, she could not predict what else might be unleashed, what additional secrets might surface, what further revelations Ferguson or others might choose to reveal. The leaked photos were more than images. They were a mirror, reflecting the precariousness of a life lived under constant observation. And as Meghan prepared for the inevitable storm, one question loomed larger than all the rest. Who else would speak, and what else would be exposed? The world had already seen a glimpse. But the full story, Meghan realized with a sinking feeling, was only just beginning to unfold. What if the person at the center of your storm wasn't just a bystander, but a participant with their own hidden agenda? For Meghan Markle, the realization that Prince Andrew's presence aboard the yacht carried more significance than she had ever imagined was both shocking and unsettling. This wasn't merely a social gathering. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, and Andrew's role would become a pivot point in a scandal that threatened to engulf her life. The yacht had always seemed like a place of leisure, a floating escape where rules felt temporarily suspended. Andrew's presence, however, lent a different weight to the events that unfolded. His reputation preceded him, controversial, influential, and adept at navigating both public perception and private maneuvering. Meghan, ever perceptive, sensed an underlying strategy in his demeanor. Every smile, every gesture, and every casual conversation seemed layered with intention. Was Andrew simply enjoying the camaraderie, or was he subtly shaping the narrative, guiding events in a way that would later benefit him or expose her? At first, Meghan tried to see the interactions at face value. Andrew appeared charming, attentive, and polite. Yet beneath the polished exterior, there were inconsistencies she could not ignore. The way he occasionally glanced toward Ferguson, the subtle nods shared between them, and the almost imperceptible moments of tension whenever Meghan entered the room, all suggested a web of communication that excluded her. Was she being set up? Or was this simply royal protocol that she had not yet mastered? The line between perception and reality blurred rapidly, leaving Meghan both anxious and suspicious. Andrew's involvement became particularly evident during casual deck conversations. Meghan recalled one afternoon when a discussion about charity events devolved into private anecdotes, revealing a level of knowledge and insight that felt unusually intimate. It wasn't just his charm, it was his timing, his precision in choosing what to reveal and when. Every sentence was measured, designed to elicit reactions, and occasionally, to plant seeds of doubt or intrigue. Meghan began to realize that Andrew was not a passive presence. He was actively influencing the atmosphere, controlling the flow of information, and, perhaps unknowingly, amplifying the potential scandal that would later emerge. But why would Andrew participate in such a delicate dance? Meghan had questions, and the answers were elusive. Was he aware of Ferguson's intentions? Was he complicit in the strategic framing of the Yacht days as potentially scandalous? Or was he simply acting in his own interest, navigating the nuances of royal life with a deftness Meghan had yet to fully comprehend? The ambiguity was maddening. In royal circles, perception is reality, and Meghan quickly understood that Andrew's subtle maneuvers could be interpreted in ways that had serious consequences for her. The psychological tension was relentless. Meghan found herself constantly analyzing every interaction, replaying conversations in her mind, and scrutinizing Andrew's gestures for hidden meaning. The mental strain was compounded by the presence of the photographs, the images captured in seemingly innocuous moments, now potentially weaponized against her. Every smile, every laugh, every casual touch with Andrew could be framed in a misleading way. The threat of misinterpretation loomed large, and Meghan felt increasingly trapped in a situation that seemed beyond her control. Meanwhile, Ferguson's strategic revelations heightened the pressure. The Duchess's hints and public commentary created a sense of inevitability, something that Meghan could not escape. Andrew's role, though subtle, amplified the tension. His interactions with Ferguson, the ease with which he navigated private conversations, and the occasional smirk shared between them suggested coordination, intentional or not, that placed Meghan squarely in the middle of a narrative she hadn't anticipated. The yacht, a symbol of leisure, had become a stage, and Andrew's presence was both central and complicating. The leaked photos, already a source of immense stress, took on additional significance in this context. Andrew's proximity in the images, his gestures, and his interactions with Meghan were dissected by the public, the media, and social commentators. Suddenly, what had been private moments of levity were interpreted as evidence of intimacy, complicity, or potential scandal. Meghan understood, with growing horror, that Andrew's actions, innocuous in intent, calculated in consequence, could shape public perception in ways that left her vulnerable and exposed. As Meghan grappled with this realization, she began to notice patterns. Andrew seemed unusually attuned to Ferguson's cues, responding in ways that suggested a shared understanding. Their conversations, though seemingly benign, carried undertones that were unmistakable once you knew what to look for. It was almost as if they were speaking in code, sharing insights and observations that Meghan was not yet privy to. The yacht, once a place of relative freedom, had become a minefield of subtle signals, hidden meanings, and strategic positioning. The psychological toll intensified when Meghan considered the potential implications beyond the immediate scandal. How would Andrew's role be interpreted by the media, by the public, by other members of the royal family? The photographs, Ferguson's disclosures, and Andrew's subtle influence all intersected to create a perfect storm of speculation, gossip, and judgment. Meghan realized that her reputation, her credibility, and her relationships within the royal sphere were all at stake. Every move she made, every interaction, every attempt to clarify or defend herself could be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or weaponized against her. But Andrew's involvement wasn't merely about optics. there was a deeper, more troubling dimension to consider. Meghan began to suspect that some of the interactions captured in the photographs might have been more than coincidental. Could it be that Andrew had an agenda, one that extended beyond simple socialization or casual conversation? And if so, how far had his influence already reached? The uncertainty gnawed at Meghan, creating a sense of vulnerability that was both emotional and psychological. She felt exposed in ways she had never experienced before, caught between public scrutiny, private betrayal, and the relentless machinations of palace dynamics. As the yacht days progressed, Meghan's anxiety grew. Andrew's presence, once a source of mild intrigue, now carried the weight of potential scandal. Every gesture, every glance, every casual remark seemed to resonate with hidden significance. Meghan began to question her own judgment, wondering if she had misread signals, overlooked cues, or failed to recognize the strategic positioning of those around her. The line between reality and interpretation blurred, leaving her in a constant state of apprehension. And then came the moment that would solidify her sense of unease. A photograph surfaced, one that captured an intimate moment between Meghan and Andrew. Innocuous in context, but explosive in the eyes of the public. Ferguson, with her knowledge of palace dynamics, had hinted at the existence of such images. Now, seeing them in print, Meghan felt the full weight of exposure. The photograph, coupled with Ferguson's commentary and Andrew's subtle role in the events, created a narrative that was impossible to ignore. It was a perfect storm. The yacht, the photographs, Ferguson's revelations, and Andrew's involvement intersected to form a scenario that left Meghan stunned. She realized that this was no longer about leisure or private interactions. It was about perception, influence, and control. Andrew's presence, his subtle cues, and his strategic positioning had shaped the narrative in ways that Meghan could neither predict nor prevent. And as Meghan tried to process the magnitude of Andrew's role, one chilling thought struck her. If he had been this involved, this aware, how much more did he know? How many other moments, interactions, or photographs were waiting to surface? And more importantly, who else within the royal circle was watching, waiting, and potentially ready to exploit these revelations for their own gain? The storm was far from over. The yacht, once a symbol of luxury and escape, had become a crucible of secrets, and Andrew's role, strategic, subtle, and potentially explosive, had placed Meghan in the eye of a scandal that was only beginning to unfold. And just when she thought she might have a grasp on the situation, the next revelation loomed on the horizon, one that would push Meghan further into uncertainty, vulnerability, and public scrutiny. Have you ever realized that the people you trust the most might be the ones whispering secrets behind your back? That even in a world of glittering crowns and luxurious estates, hidden agendas lurk where you least expect them? For Meghan Markle, the realization was both shocking and terrifying. The palace itself was alive with whispers, subtle manipulations, and agendas that could unravel her life in ways she had never imagined. It began with small hints, the kind that might seem insignificant to an outsider. A glance exchanged in a hallway that lasted a little too long, a staff member's half-smile when a topic was mentioned, a casual remark dropped during afternoon tea. Each detail seemed minor in isolation, but Meghan, attuned to nuance, noticed patterns. There were conversations that ended abruptly whenever she entered the room. Memos circulated with subtle implications, suggesting knowledge of events she believed were private. It was almost as if the palace itself had become a stage, and she was simultaneously the audience and the unwitting actor. The palace, Meghan quickly realized, was not just a residence. It was a labyrinth of influence, where every gesture, every comment, and every relationship carried weight. The staff, while professional, often acted as silent conduits of information. Some were loyal, others opportunistic, and a few operated in ways that were difficult to categorize at all. Meghan began to understand that loyalty in this environment was fluid, dependent not on friendship or personal connection, but on influence, perception, and advantage. Sarah Ferguson's revelations had already sent shockwaves, but Meghan began to see how deeply those ripples extended. Ferguson, with her insider knowledge, understood how to maneuver within this ecosystem. Her casual anecdotes, her hints about photographs and private moments, were not just stories. They were strategic tools designed to influence, manipulate, and create leverage. And behind those tools were individuals within the palace, the whisperers, who amplified her words, added layers of commentary, and ensured that the information reached the right ears at precisely the right time. Meghan felt the tension acutely. Every interaction became a test of trust. Was the aide offering her a cup of tea genuinely attentive, or was that attention a subtle probe for information? Were the private conversations she believed were confidential being reported back to others? She began to notice coded language, gestures, and micro-expressions that hinted at knowledge beyond what she had disclosed. Every smile, every nod, every casual comment seemed to carry potential implications. In a world where perception is reality, Meghan realized that even minor details could be weaponized. It was here, in this web of whispers, that Meghan began to question the motives of those closest to her. Allies appeared, offering support, but she could not be certain whether their loyalty was genuine or a calculated move. Subtle competitions, hidden rivalries, and carefully timed disclosures suggested that some individuals were actively shaping events for their own gain. Who could be trusted? Who was orchestrating behind-the-scenes maneuvers? And who would benefit if Meghan's reputation were destabilized? The psychological strain was unrelenting. Meghan found herself constantly analyzing every interaction, replaying conversations in her mind, and considering the implications of every word spoken. Was a compliment sincere, or was it designed to draw her into a trap? Was a critique constructive, or did it carry a hidden sting meant for public interpretation? The palace had become a maze of strategy and subtle manipulation, and Meghan was at its center, navigating blindfolded. Ferguson's influence was magnified by these palace dynamics. Her revelations about yacht days and private photographs were just the beginning. The palace staff, aides, and insiders acted as amplifiers, ensuring that Ferguson's words reached a wider audience, and in ways that maximized scrutiny and speculation. Meghan began to realize that even without further public statements, the infrastructure of the palace itself could be used to influence perception. Whispers carried weight. Half-truths became narrative, and ambiguity fueled suspicion. It wasn't just the staff. Family members, advisors, and courtiers were all participants in this intricate dance. Conversations behind closed doors, subtle exchanges during public appearances, and carefully choreographed interactions all suggested a level of awareness that Meghan had not anticipated. She began to question the motives of those she had once considered allies, realizing that influence within the palace was a currency more powerful than titles or lineage. Every day brought new evidence of hidden agendas. Emails, casual remarks, and even social media interactions seemed calculated to send messages indirectly. Meghan realized that the palace was not simply a residence. It was a strategic environment where information was power, perception was reality, and personal privacy was a fragile illusion. Her own actions were scrutinized not only by the media, but by a network of palace insiders who operated in subtle, often invisible ways. The emotional toll was immense. Meghan oscillated between disbelief, anger, and paranoia. She questioned her own judgment, wondering if she had misread situations or overlooked subtle cues. Trust, she realized, was a luxury she could no longer afford. Every gesture, every statement, every smile had to be measured against the potential for hidden meaning, manipulation, or betrayal. And the photographs from the yacht, those already leaked, and the ones hinted at by Ferguson, loomed over every interaction like a shadow. Even attempts at normalcy became fraught. A casual stroll through the palace gardens, a friendly conversation with staff, or a routine public engagement could be interpreted in ways that advanced hidden agendas. Meghan began to see the palace not as a home, but as a living organism, pulsating with whispers, secrets, and agendas that operated beyond her control. Every corner seemed to hold potential for exposure, every room a theater for subtle power plays, and every interaction a test of perception and trust. And yet, amid the tension, Meghan realized that she had to act strategically. She could not ignore the whispers, but neither could she let them dictate her every move. Awareness became her weapon. Observation became her ally. She began cataloging interactions, noting patterns, and identifying individuals whose motives were opaque or potentially hostile. The palace had become a battlefield of perception, and Meghan had to learn quickly how to navigate it. or risk being consumed. But the stakes extended beyond her personal experience. The whispers, the leaks, and the hidden agendas had implications for the broader royal family. Relationships between members, lines of loyalty, and the delicate balance of influence were all being affected. Meghan realized that this was no longer just about her. The exposure of Yacht days, amplified by Ferguson and carried forward by palace insiders, threatened to create ripples that could destabilize alliances, provoke tension, and influence public opinion in unpredictable ways. And just when Meghan thought she had mapped the terrain, when she believed she could anticipate the next whisper or maneuver, the most chilling realization struck. Someone within this web was likely orchestrating events to ensure the next revelation would be devastating. The leaked photos, Ferguson's commentary, and the palace whispers were not isolated incidents. They were components of a carefully layered strategy designed to destabilize, confuse, and control the narrative. Meghan knew she had to prepare, but she could not foresee the next move. Who would speak? What additional secrets were being held? And which hidden agenda would come to light next, threatening to alter the trajectory of her life and public perception forever? The palace, with its whispers and hidden agendas, had become a crucible. Meghan was caught in the eye of a storm she could see forming but could not stop. Every ally might be a potential adversary, every gesture could be a test, and every secret held the potential to explode. And just as Meghan braced herself for what she thought might be the climax, the next revelation emerged, one that would shift everything and leave her reeling. What would you do if the world suddenly had access to the most intimate parts of your life? Not just your public persona, but the moments you thought were untouchable. Quiet laughs, casual gestures, private smiles, fleeting glances captured forever. For Meghan Markle, this nightmare became reality. Her private life, once carefully guarded, was now under siege from every angle imaginable, and the scale of exposure was overwhelming. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Emails arrived with unusual frequency, some cryptic, others blatantly questioning her actions and choices. Messages on social media multiplied, each one dissecting her every move, and tabloids seemed to know more about her personal habits than she did. She would see headlines questioning her relationships, speculating on intentions, and spinning narratives that twisted simple moments into scandalous conjecture. Even casual encounters in public carried an invisible weight. Every word she spoke, every smile she gave, was analyzed through the lens of suspicion, and every step she took became fodder for judgment. The leaked photographs, the yacht days captured in sunlight and shadow, were just the beginning. Ferguson's disclosures had opened the floodgates. Every image, every anecdote, every snippet of conversation from those days was now reinterpreted, contextualized, and weaponized in ways Meghan could not have anticipated. A laugh shared with Andrew, a casual glance exchanged on deck, an innocent gesture during a conversation. Each moment was transformed into a potential scandal, magnified by Ferguson's insider commentary. The breach of privacy was total, and Meghan was acutely aware that the walls around her life had crumbled. The pressure extended beyond public perception. Within her private circle, trust was fragile. Allies offered support, but Meghan struggled to distinguish between genuine concern and calculated alignment with palace dynamics. Every interaction carried ambiguity. Who could she confide in? Who might relay her words to someone else? Even those she considered close friends were now potential conduits for information, a reality that made every conversation feel like a strategic exercise rather than a personal exchange. Meghan's routine became a delicate balancing act. Simple daily activities, meeting with aides, taking calls, attending charitable events, were fraught with tension. Her movements were scrutinized, her schedule dissected, her choices questioned. Every decision had to be considered in light of potential leaks, misinterpretation, and exploitation. The concept of privacy, once taken for granted, became an almost unattainable luxury. Each day presented a new challenge, a fresh threat, and a reminder that her personal life was no longer her own. The psychological strain was immense. Meghan experienced sleepless nights, waking in the early hours with her mind racing. Questions tumbled over each other in her thoughts. Who else knows about these photos? How far have the leaks gone? What will Ferguson reveal next? How will the royal family react? Each query compounded the stress, leaving her emotionally vulnerable, frustrated, and trapped in a constant cycle of anticipation and dread. The invasion of privacy wasn't just emotional. It was physical, manifesting as tension in her shoulders, knots in her stomach, and a persistent feeling of being watched. Adding to the torment was the media frenzy. News outlets ran stories that blended fact with speculation, headlines designed to provoke shock and outrage. Social media amplified these narratives, with opinions, memes, and commentary proliferating at an unprecedented pace. Meghan's private moments, once confined to her memory or the company of trusted individuals, were now public property. She became a target of fascination, scrutiny, and judgment, a subject in a narrative she had not consented to and could not easily control. Even within the palace, Meghan sensed shifts in attitude. Conversations were measured, smiles appeared guarded, and interactions carried the faintest undertones of suspicion or judgment. The Yacht days, once a brief escape, now had repercussions across relationships she valued. Trust became a delicate commodity, and Meghan realized that her personal life was no longer insulated from the machinery of royal politics, public opinion, and strategic disclosure. Every gesture was loaded, every comment weighed, and every interaction had the potential to be twisted into a narrative she could neither predict nor prevent. Ferguson's strategic release of information had created a relentless feedback loop. Every leak prompted discussion, speculation, and further scrutiny. Meghan felt besieged from all sides, by media outlets, social networks, palace insiders, and even her own family's advisors. The siege was psychological.